What is going on, everybody? Episode 91 of the Podioslave podcast experience, because it's a fully immersive experience. It's Anthony. I'm here. Nate, Tony. What's good, fellas?
I say it every week. I'm going to continue to say it. Best day of the week, man. Get to hang out with you guys, geek out. I can't do it with anyone else. I try to geek out with coworkers and friends and other friends and, my wife, and everyone's like, yeah, cool. But it's not at this level. This is like a full-on nerd exchange, which is one of a kind in my mind.
They poo-poo you and just say, yeah, cool, like, leave me alone, bro. I don't want to hear from you anymore.
No, I mean, it gets, I get some nerd moments here and there, but it's just not the same level. I mean, Twan really put it in context a few weeks ago. It's like, we're a different breed. It's like, yep. I can't geek out on like, check out this 18x24 promo poster I snagged. Like, everyone would be like, cool, man. Like, what time is it? Like, so
I don't even know who that band is, bro. Like,
yeah, cool. Isn't that like a free thing you throw out after like a month or whatever? Nah, man, I got tons.
Not us. We hang on to all of it, baby. Yeah, no, episode 91 is wild to me. And we're closing in on the end of 2021 too, which is pretty cool. Because it's been for us, as far as the pod goes, pretty epic year. So yeah, I'm excited to do this every week with you guys too. And tonight is no different.
It's so funny. You said people can't relate to your nerd level. Like even with my wife, I'm like, I don't know. Hey, what do you think of that breakdown on that song you just heard? 100 Demons, that's an album I have right on my desk here. 100 Demons Breakdown. She's like, what the fuck are you talking about? And I even get protective over the nerdery, like in the house. Like I have a lot of my posters are in like big top loaders, and I have those. It's like nowhere to put them, so I have them on our coffee table in the basement. She'll put like a beverage on it, and I'm like, get that off of there. Like These are irreplaceable. Like there's some stuff you can't even get on eBay these days.
Right.
So maybe I'm just nuts. I think that's
both. Both. The answer is both. We are nuts and we are nerds and we love this shit. And some people are nerds about sports, and we are that too, to an extent, but some people are nerds about all kinds of different things. And we just happen to like to talk about music and be around music in any way, shape, or form. And that leads us to tonight. What we have on in store for you tonight is a conversation with Nate. We're going to interview Nate. We interviewed Twan a few months back. I'm going to interview Nate on his time as venue support, because he's done this in a couple of different capacities over the years at different venues, whether it be fixing stages up or behind the scenes stuff or talking to bands or any of that stuff. It's been Nate doing venue support stuff. So Twan and I have some questions for him, and we prepped him before. We asked him if we could use a photo and all that fun stuff. And he said no. So sorry, guys, you're just going to get a regular card. It's going to say Podioslave Podcast on it. It is what it is. But yeah, we're going to talk to Nate tonight. So Nate, are you ready for this?
Yeah, I'm ready to geek out. Before we went on, I was just thinking like, man, how's this going to go? Because you go through the whole gamut with guests all the time, and it just seems like clockwork. But to be on the other side of the table, I'm like, shit, is there stuff I want to admit after the edit? I don't know. Maybe. I don't think so. There's nothing controversial, but yeah, it's just weird to be on the other side of the table in my own podcast. But yeah, stoked. I'm just always stoked to hang out with you guys. So, I mean, it's all good.
It's funny. Before we did start recording tonight, I did say to him, when we're done with it, when it's edited, we'll load it. You can listen to it before we put it up, because we do that every week. So it's no different this week as it's going to be any other week. Nate just happens to be the topic of conversation. So
this will be fun. I'll kick us off. So Tony and myself, and obviously you, Nate, we've been listening to music for years, going to shows for years. But Tony and I never, I'm going to speak for myself here, I never thought to be on the other side of it at the show, whether it be a musician or working at the venue. I never thought of it. Did you, Tone?
I did it once. I took money at the door for our friend Chris's band at the station back in probably 2005 or 2006, and it was only once. And I just took money when people came in. It was $5 cover, and gave it to, I don't even remember who I gave it to. I was surprised they let me do it, honestly. And it was, it wasn't a super well attended show, so Nate has been at some bigger shows than that, so it'll be a little more interesting to hear that. But that was the only time I ever did it. And yeah, I've thought about it in the past, like walking into shows, like, oh, this person, this is their job. They're, patting me down or wanding me or whatever, and checking my ID and giving me a bracelet so I can get a beer. And would I want to do that? Yeah, if I can go inside and watch a show after. But
right.
otherwise, yeah, I don't know. It's a different breed to be like in it all the time, and maybe they aren't as into music as we are, and that's why they're doing it. Who knows? But Nate is like, there's some pictures out there that we might hopefully unearth of Nate being right in the middle of things.
Oh
So
yeah,
you never know.
that'll come up. That'll come up tonight. And it got me thinking. Like in college, I was on a committee that booked shows, and we had the starting line, we had piebald, but it was not what you did, Nate. This was very surface level at a college, so I can't really relate probably to what we're going to talk about. So I'm curious, what was the pivot? How the hell did you get into it? You just show up to a venue and say, "Hey, let me work here." What happened?
Good question. And similar to what you guys were saying, you go to shows, you walk in, you kind of see the staff, you're like, on a nerd level, you're kind of like, man, how did they get that job? It seems like there's like this some kind of inner circle to like even get into the venue as an employee. It seems like unattainable in a lot of ways. And I remember asking all the time and sending emails, and you never hear back. And a lot of the reasons you don't hear back is because the staff doesn't really flip. There's not a whole lot of turnover because they're also nerds. They're happy to be there. The pay may not be great, but the benefits are, plentiful. Like you get to go to shows free all the time. You get to see history unfold. It's a real nerd first person experience in a lot of ways. So for me in high school, especially, I was like, that's like the only job I wanted. And I just couldn't get it. Like it was unattainable. This is like, we graduated high school in 03. So like 2000, 2003, like State Theater was off and on. So it was kind of tough, and mainly through Live Nation. So, Live Nation is not going to give a high schooler a job. Clubs are all 21 plus. So literally like there's no barrier of entry at all, at least in our market in Portland, Maine. Like there was just no way to even do it. We graduate 03, and I'm still kind of throwing some emails and messages out there. Like, how can I get into this industry? I really just don't even care about the pay at this point. I just want to see what it's like. So come 04, I reached out to a local promoter that was putting on club shows, I-90 Presents / Mass Concerts out of Boston. And they were doing a lot of metal shows and punk shows in the Portland, Maine region for Asylum, which is now Aura, along with the mass concert venues under their contract in Massachusetts, Palladium in particular, with a few other small clubs, Chantilly's in Manchester, New Hampshire, which I don't think is active anymore. And kind of got my feet wet right out of the gate. Promoter gave me a shot, and he was local to Portland. So he said, yeah, let's do it. So basically let me shadow him on the job, everything from stagehanding to somewhat booking shows. I really just watched him book shows and jump on the phone and see how it all went down. And I was pretty young, right? So I didn't have a whole lot of business acumen in how it all works, but I was ready to learn. I was ready to check it out. And it was really the only outlet other than this independent promoter. It was all Live Nation. So it was like this or nothing unless I moved to California or some kind of major market to get my feet wet. So yeah, I'd say 04 is when it kind of kicked off.
So we're 20, 21, 19 even at that time. And you're ambitious enough to get out there and find somebody who is doing it so that you can do it, because your love of music started before this, and there's a local indie promoter in our hometown, and you're like, all right, I'm going to do this. I want to do it. What did he have you do? Like, what was the first day when you were working? What was your job? Were you like door? Were you like cleaning stuff up on stage? What was exactly what he had you do that first day?
First day was actually, so his apartment, he had a little office and a bunch of cool band flyers. A lot of the shows I actually went to kind of plastered through the wall. So for me, it was like, that looks like my bedroom, just a bunch of, posters and nerdery on the wall. Like I already feel at home. This is cool. But basically just watched him, and this is 2004, right? So internet's pretty young still. So like for the most part, music promotion is email, and that's about it. You're still kind of, everything's pretty manual. You're still taking calls with band management and stuff like that. So because I was essentially an intern to this guy and his company, I didn't do anything out of the gate verbatim. I was essentially watching him do it, and basically I was CC'd on emails and watching all this stuff go down. I thought it was really cool because it was like, well, this is the only way I'm going to get any kind of entry to this whole giant industry, which is for the most part pretty exclusive. It's a lot of who you know, what you know, not what you know. And in a secondary market, there's just not a whole lot of outlets like I was alluding to earlier. So this is really the only way to get in. So to answer your question, the first day was really just shadowing, watching him, how he talked, how he, negotiated, which I've always been a negotiator. So I was like, oh, this is right up my alley. Like this is, music industry. This is cliche, the stuff you see in the movies, like you're haggling people, or promoters or artist management on what they call guarantee. So you're booking a guarantee based on what the band or what the talent needs to basically, in a lot of ways, break even. So said tickets kind of are divided by that advance to disperse tickets to hopefully sell at a venue. So I'd say, a long story long, my first day was basically watching that whole game go down in real time on the initial part of how a show goes down is really, well, hey, you got to book the show. So that was day one in the office.
So I didn't even know you were exposed to that side of it. Like I was thinking more of day of show. That got me thinking though, and you probably have experience with this and can probably speak to it.
Yeah.
Is there more negotiation in a small market like Portland, for example? More negotiation in terms of guarantees and whatnot for bands?
Yeah, I think so. Because major market, you have the draw. You also have the support of local record stores, radio stations. So let's use Boston as an example. You have, at the time, especially early 2000s, you had WAAF and WBCN. So powerhouse radio stations in a time when terrestrial radio was still really strong. So if you booked a show, even if you were like a independent promoter, aside from Live Nation, Ticketmaster, like you could get a pretty good turnout because you're a major market city with promotion that is essentially pushing your show for you, whether you did some kind of advertising deal with them or not. Like, you have the draw. Secondary market's a whole different ballgame because, the radio station may be playing a song late night or something like that. So like you don't really have a whole lot of exposure in that sense. So you're really just kind of depending on diehard fans or people traveling from major markets to catch a second show on that leg. So negotiation wise, you're really gambling, because you can't guarantee anyone's going to show up, but you don't want to not book the show. So you're really kind of trying to predict the future in like this crystal ball. Like, well, I know this band's good. I know I'm a fan. I know there's a crowd out there that likely will come. And I can't speak to this too much, but I know based on what I saw and what I was kind of on the sidelines for, which is metrics on the current or local record store. So Bull Moose Music for us in Portland, like there was a little bit of insight there on, hey, like Shadows Fall selling quite a few records, like, maybe they would do well if you booked them locally, and they were out of Boston. So like there was already some crossover local fan base wise, but could you guarantee Shadows Fall's management that you were going to sell out the show? Well, no, not really. I mean, it's a roll of the dice. So again, long story long, there is a lot of negotiating. Like there's just, and especially I have to keep bringing up that.
I could definitely see that.
I have to keep bringing up the time frame. It was like early 2000s. So there just really wasn't a whole lot of ways to gauge some real metrics that were working in your favor. You're really, I felt like we were guessing all the time.
You bring up Bull Moose, and they have a way to track, and they've had it for years, how things go in their store and what gets bought and where it gets bought from in their multiple locations. Yep. And that was kind of an early precursor to what we know now as Spotify and Apple Music and artists. I know we've talked to Spose, and Spose has told us you can tell, where you're popular for the most part and where you might do well to play a show because people are listening to your music or streaming your music there. Back then, all they had was, the record stores. So, and back then it feels like it's not that long ago, but we're talking 17 years ago, 18 years ago now, which is kind of wild. So to hear that and go back to that, I remember going to shows and remember buying tickets and thinking, man, it's cool. These bands are coming around. I wonder how they end up picking Portland. And now I'm like, why don't they pick Portland? They should, because Portland would kill it.
Right. Yeah.
Back then I'm like, we didn't get everything. We got some stuff and this goes back to our conversation with Lauren Wayne and the promoter of the State Theater. We were a tertiary market back then, and we're more of a secondary market now because of the way we've handled things and the growth that the city's seen. But this was back in those tertiary market days where you might get some stuff on a one-off. You might get some stuff that's just like, we're going to play these small, dingy, dirty basements to get our name out there. And I think that was kind of the world you were in at the moment, right, Nate?
Yeah, 100%. Like if it got radio play and it was consistent radio play, and you could kind of, like I said earlier, you're almost placing your bets on those little analog assessments, but there was no like metrics like you have today. It was very like, man, hopefully this guy gives me some insight at Bull Moose, or hopefully the radio station, gives us some tips on how many people are literally calling in requesting the song. So it was actually like that back then. And I got to go back to the advanced too, because the advanced, if you don't make your return on investment on the tickets sold, you're eating that cost. So like basically you're withdrawing money from your own personal checking account, paying the advance to this band's management, and they're paid no matter what. So if like 10 people show up, doesn't matter. Band's paid, management's paid, next tour stop, like we're good. So actually the band actually has a lot in their favor when it comes to how that all plays out, because they get paid for just showing up, really.
Right.
So as the talent buyer, like you want to hopefully break even, and if you profit, excellent, but you're not getting anything concession wise. You're not, unless you own the club, like you're not getting concessions. All the merch is, inside the band's own house. So like you're just depending, hoping to God that like all the tickets sell, or at least you are a little over breaking even, because there's just so much. Like you're paying for, like we would hire people to set up the stage, like by the hour, just paying, whatever wage and free meal or something like that. So it's like everything adds up. You're like, man, like we really need this to work. Like hopefully, the label for said artists, I'm going to bring up Shadows Fall again. Like hopefully someone at Roadrunner has a street team and is actually promoting the show, because we can only do so much independently. Like we need, at this time, especially, we really need as many people helping us out as possible, because we're just so small. Like we just don't have the pull, but we know like someone's got to do it, So, and as a fan, I was like, man, like if we didn't do it, like these shows just wouldn't roll through, So it's like us or like literally Maine is just like a Passover stop. Like, we go to Mass and then we keep going south.
Let's dial back to the size venue. So what you just said makes me think it was you were working smaller venues or it's just a different era, because nowadays venues do rake off the top from merch sales. Venues get 10%. That's why you hear, I've heard on certain other podcasts of bands lying about how much merch they sell to the venue. Unconfirmed.
Yeah.
Unconfirmed, but suspected.
Unconfirmed. Yeah, and this is where it gets a little dicey, because maybe that was the case. Maybe we were getting a percentage off merch sales that I didn't know about. I don't think so, though.
Well, the promotion probably wasn't, but the venue might have been.
Oh, the venue. Yeah, said venue. Yeah, it is a partnership. So like, yeah, we, as a promoter, we didn't have any stake in the venue's revenue at all. And we were booking venues in Portland, Maine, Manchester, New Hampshire, and different secondary market, or not secondary markets, but submarkets of Massachusetts.
So you're working kind of behind the scenes early on, learning the trade a little bit, getting kind of in on some of the ground floor of how the operation goes. What was the first show you worked?
Oh man, what was the first show? These tickets didn't have ticket stubs too, so I don't have the spreadsheet on everything, unfortunately. But I think the first show that I worked was Clutch, Scissor Fight, and who else was on that bill? There was a third band on that bill. I can't remember who it was, at the Asylum. And it was a 21 plus show. So mind you, I wasn't 21 at the time, but when you're a staff member, maybe this isn't legal, I have no idea, but was waived. Like I was fine because I was working the show. I couldn't drink. I had a big X on my hand. Like there's no way I was going to be able to get any kind of alcohol. So if my memory serves me, I believe that was my first show, was Clutch, Scissor Fight. And there was a third band on that bill, and I can't remember who it was, but I remember being like, this is so sweet, because I actually want to be at the show anyway. And that was kind of like why I got into the business. I was like, well, I want to go to these shows anyway. I might as well make a few dollars while I'm here.
Was that the show you tried to get me into?
Could be. This is like 2000.
Allegedly.
Yeah, allegedly. Yeah. No. We talked to his boss, and he was like, nah, he can get the fuck out of here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
04, so that's Blast Tyrant for Clutch. So that kind of adds up. Yeah.
Man, I wish I could have gotten into that show.
So Nate, you show up at the venue, your first time doing this. Obviously, you've been to a million shows as a spectator, but now you're working it. How would you classify it? Stagehand? Like help with load in, or?
Yeah. I've always prided myself in kind of wanting to be part of every part of the supply chain per se. So booked the show. That was cool. We got Clutch. Great. One of my favorite bands. I had learned about Clutch in 2002-ish. So this was cool to actually see them in concert. Because every time they came through Maine, it was always a 21 plus show. So this kind of goes back to like, well, I never got to freaking see the band because they play venues that I can't even get into. So now I'm working the show so I can see the gig as a fan, but I'm working the gig. So yeah, so I think it was booked the show, and then the show came through. I didn't do stage setup for that show, but I did breakdown. So when I was at the venue on this first gig, I think it was handling tickets at first, kind of next to the asylum staff. So mainly just kind of working in tandem with them, and then working with the actual band themselves, Clutch. So that was kind of like my first experience. Like, hey, can you take care of the band? Like they need food, they need drinks, like go get their rider, make sure they're all set. So I broke the one rule, which is, and it was never told to me, but I know just as a fan, like you probably shouldn't do this. I had like 7 album covers in my pocket. Like, sweet, I'll deliver their food, I'll deliver their booze, and I'll make sure I get my shit signed.
Yeah.
To get it signed. Man, I love that. So you were resourceful to see a show when you weren't old enough, and then you were resourceful to get stuff signed when you probably wouldn't have been able to otherwise. I love where this is going. What would you like have them hang out at your house too?
Yeah, play at my wedding kind of thing.
Yeah.
No, it was perfect because it was I think in a club setting it's a little bit more natural. It's not like a arena. If like I would have bust out like a bunch of like, vinyl flats or whatever at a arena, especially one that's owned and operated by a big player like Live Nation, I would probably most likely get fired on the spot because that's breaking literal protocol. Club is independent, so you can kind of do whatever you want. Maybe you shouldn't do it. It's a little taboo. It is what it is. But all the, autobiographies and like books on rock stars and people that came up and, they all went through this phase where they were fans of music. So they wanted to be as close to the music as they could. So they also worked at venues, or they also were stagehands, or they were also in some capacity in that moment the same person. They just want to be close to it. And like, how do you get close to it? Well, working shows or working at a record store. So it really wasn't that taboo. So yeah, I brought the band their, all their stuff, and I was like, hey man, big fan, like stoked to see you guys tonight. Have fun. Oh, by the way, I got these albums. Boom, signed. Great, cool. Promoted it. By the way, I did help book this show, so it's not like I'm just a fan. Like I really do part of this machine. So this is full circle type stuff. So yeah, that was my first day, and I was just like, this is really cool. Like it doesn't pay much, and it is what it is, but I mean, you got to start somewhere. Luckily, I was at the age where it didn't matter, right? If that's
a good point. That is a great point.
Yeah.
Well, and the other thing is, like, at that time you were young and new to it, so like you did fill your pocket with CDs or records to have stuff signed. We joke about you doing that today, but you're much better about that stuff today. You're not breaking rules. You're not breaking protocols. You've learned about the game a little bit as far as how getting stuff signed works, and we can talk about that at a later date. But yeah, you're not looking to like get in the way of what's going on. So, because that leads us to what you're doing today, and you're not doing that. It's just not the same level as it was when we were 20 and like, oh man, I get to see Clutch and hey, sign my CD. Like, yeah. Today we're like, all right, cool. Like, we'll interview you. Like, we'll talk to you all day. Like, let's just do that.
So you left that show. It sounds like wanting to do more of that. And actually, this is a question. Do you think it was because you liked the act? Like, what if the show sucked? Do you think you still would have, like a different act? I'm not going to even name a band, but like if the act sucked, the band sucked, would you think you'd be back?
That's a good question, because my first show just happened to be one that I was a big fan of. But we booked tons of shows where A, I didn't know who the band was at all, or B, knew who they were and wasn't a fan of at all, and still had a blast because it was like I was in the scene, in a scene that didn't have anything going on. I mean, anyone listening, like Portland, Maine, early 2000s was a very, very like dismal market. There just wasn't a whole lot going on. It was very, blue collar. So like to see any kind of like entertainment industry type thing roll through Maine was like such a big occasion. I think I always go back to why we're such big fans is because we just like, it was like really the coolest thing to roll through was like a show. Didn't matter what it was, So I was like, holy shit, a show, like something out of, not from the state of Maine coming through. This is giant. So to answer your question, I don't think it would have mattered because I worked so many shows that I didn't know who the artist was. And sometimes it actually turns you on to a lot of music you didn't know and different genres that you didn't really respect. And you're like, oh, I really dig this now. I think metal is a great example of that. I thought metal was great. And there was a lot of metal bands that I liked coming up when we were in high school. But it wasn't till I was working for this promoter in these venues that in Maine at the time, and I still does to this day, has a very strong like hardcore metal scene. I was like, this music is better than I ever thought it was, because I get to like work the show side stage and like, you know, put together the stage, get to know the artists, and anyone that's in the metal scene will know, I think Kat can attest to this from Pure Noise, that like metal artists, although the music's very heavy and very aggressive and kind of has some negative connotation, you know, if you want to put it that way, they're for whatever reason, they're the nicest people on the planet. I've never met someone from metal band that was like the dick so far, knock on wood.
It's early,
it's
Nate. It's early.
Yeah, they're out there, but you haven't met them. And you're right. On the whole, that scene, everybody seems to be like, everybody always says hockey guys are great guys, like pro hockey players. Like they beat the crap out of each other 3 nights a week.
Right.
But then they get off the ice and they're just like super nice and happy. And it's because they get to beat the crap out of each other for 3 weeks or 3 days. And the same thing with metal. Like, you get to like let all that frustration out in the energy of the music sometimes, and then you come on and you're like, yeah, I'm much happier than that guy over there is clearly holding it all in. Like I got to let it all go, so I can see that for sure. And you doing this job inadvertently opened that door for me musically, like listening to stuff and being a fan of things, and then obviously this podcast and the stuff that Twan has introduced me to. So I'm happy for all of this because I get to have my doors and windows open to this music that is really great, even if it doesn't always make your ears happy at the time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and this is coming from a genuine spot. Like when I go to shows, like I see certain staff, you know, it could be, you know, staff of the venue itself. It could be staff of the promoter or whatnot. Like I heard you say you were kind of a runner, right? Anything the band needed. I've attended several shows that you worked, and I remember seeing it's very hands-on. Like you were actually on the stage, maybe adjusting things like that. Like, is that where it ends? Like, is it you're a runner, you help with load in, load out, like, and maybe it's like a startup, you know, in Portland, Maine, in a small promotion company where you wear a bunch of hats. Like, what's the most bizarre? I guess this is a good question. What's the most bizarre thing you did?
I mean, I think to your point earlier in the question that you are wearing multiple hats, because it's really just the promoter himself, in this case, a guy, and me. Like I was really his protege. Like he didn't have a staff. It was very small, very tight. He had a day job. I had a day job. I was in college. I still had a day job and this. This is like my third gig. So yeah, I mean, everything from take a stagehand, like you said, those shows you saw me on stage. For me at the time on stage, I was like, man, I finally like know what it's like to like peel a set list off the stage and give it to a fan that's dying to have it, because I know what that's like and I appreciate it, you know, like, yeah, man, I know you want the set list, because if I was there, I would want the set list too. So like I actually at the time really like made me happy to do that, scour the stage for picks. Like, yeah, man, like hold on, give me a second, I'll see what I can find for you. I didn't have any problem with that. In terms of like weirdest, what do you say, strangest thing or whatever that happened?
Yeah, just like what's something that maybe wasn't in the job description that, you know, like, I don't know, like a guy from Clutch wanted a Maine Italian sandwich or something, you know, it's just something.
A weird thing that happened one time in New Hampshire is we booked the band, which we're all fans of, Head PE, on their tour for, what was the one after Blackout? Only in America. Only in America. And they did a gig. This is before the album dropped, actually. So there was still almost the all original lineup, with the exception of Chad leaving. And there was a show in New Hampshire, and the singer Jared had kidney stones. So I didn't go to the hospital, but my boss had to drive Jared to the hospital to take care of the kidney stones. And it was like very like tough situation, because it was like, oh man, like this is like pretty, you know, I mean, he's got to perform, you know, and like I was alluding to earlier, like everything depends on everything essentially, hopefully going all right, let alone kidney stones, like throw that wrench into it. So holy shit, like this is a big deal. They ended up canceling the show that night, or they couldn't perform. So all the guys in Head PE are all hanging out, just talking to them. It was really cool. And the support band that actually ended up headlining that night, which was Nonpoint, So in terms of like weirdest or just like strangest scenario unfold for me, it was like, oh wow, like the band that we booked can't perform, so now we got to switch this whole thing on everyone that bought tickets and say the support is now the headliner because the singer has kidney stones and like cannot perform tonight, like literally is in excruciating pain, so like there's no way this is going to happen. So I think that's the one that's most memorable, is just seeing something totally collapse in front of you, where like actually everything went pretty well. Tickets sold pretty well. I think it was close to sold out. And then having to just basically say, hey, sorry, if you want, I can't remember if we were doing refunds or not, but it was basically like, hey, sorry, headliner's no longer. So you guys like Nonpoint, right? Like they're the headliner now.
Yeah,
And the show,
Non-Point's awesome. So that worked out as far as not having to cancel completely. You had a good a good band to like, especially around then. They were crushing it. So yeah, that works. I mean, was it the same tour that we saw them on in Portland at the station?
Different tour. It was so they played that show, and then 2 days later they played the Palladium in Worcester.
Gotcha.
So this is like a little side gig, because I mean Chantilly's, I'm pretty sure the venue's not active anymore, but it was like cap, I think 300 seats.
Damn,
300.
Love that size.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you know what? That actually is a rare scenario where that show still worked. Like Nonpoint could have probably filled that room themselves.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, so as a fan, you're like, all right, it sucks. I'm not seeing the headliner, but it could have been worse. It could have been just local openers, and then everyone's pissed.
Right.
I think that's why it worked. But it was so last minute that Nonpoint didn't even hit the stage until midnight. So I didn't get home until like three in the morning. It was a school night and everything. Yeah.
So that's a pretty bizarre thing to have happen, in the middle of promoting and putting on a show and traveling to do so. I mean, that you've got to really love doing that stuff to be part of it. And at that point, like, I mean, I know you, and I've talked to you now for I don't know how many hours on this podcast alone, but in our friendship, hundreds of thousands probably. Were you like, I don't know if this is for me at that point, or were you like, I want this, I love this, the chaos of it's kind of cool, and I want to keep doing it?
It's a great question for many reasons. So this is 04 to around 05-ish. I was still in Maine, and I knew, I mean, this is kind of a weird glimpse of the industry because it's so startup, it's so small time that it's like, well, there's no way I can make a living off this. That's for sure. So I was a little perplexed on, man, I really love this industry. I think this is an interesting segue into the industry because it's so scattered and so non-lucrative that, if I were to go down this path, like, I don't know if I'll ever be able to like move out of my parents' house type scenario. So I was a little jaded, but I knew there was more to it, especially if I moved on. So I did end up leaving, and I moved to New York City to kind of get a better snapshot of what the industry is like, in like the real deal. New York City and LA were kind of like the pinnacle markets at the time. So I moved to New York City and went into it with kind of, fresh eyes to try, test the waters then, basically, at that time.
You hit on like bizarre stuff, which was, the kidney stones, Jared. Like I said, I attended a few shows that you worked at, and one of them is, and I've been, like we've said a million times, we've been to thousands of shows collectively, probably over 1,000 shows collectively. You worked one of the craziest shows I've ever been to. And that show was the Shadows Fall Terror Zayao tour back in 2005 at the station. There's photos. Return to the Pit was there, which is awesome. We'll link all that out probably in the show notes or something and post on the socials. But this made, and I'll tell you why, but in a second, this made like national, I don't know about national news, but there was a buzz around this show so much that Blabbermouth, I don't know if you know this, Nate, Blabbermouth posted about this show.
Wow.
Do you remember that?
I was addicted to Blabbermouth. Anyone listening, Blabbermouth is, like a metal forum, right? Cool photos, cool stories. Just, it's like a nerd website.
News and stuff. Yeah, they posted about the show. I'll read you what they said. At last night's Shadows Fall Terror Zayao show at the station in Portland, Maine, the ceiling was literally brought down. During Terror and Shadows Fall's set, the ceiling panels were ripped out. So if you can visualize like drop ceiling, crowd surfers were pulling out lights, ripping down wiring, and hanging from ductwork that was exposed. At one point, the show was stopped, and people had to move back so that the live wires could be stuffed back into up into the remnants of the ceiling. So I was there. I witnessed this. I relive this show through these photos like every couple of years. It is absolutely ridiculous. The show should have been stopped like 10 times.
Yeah.
And we'll post photos, but like, how is it working that show?
Man,
That was fucking nuts.
It was nuts.
Pause the episode. Go look at the photos. We'll link them out.
Wow. I mean, it's such a memery. That was one of those times where I was so green that I was like, what do we do in this situation? And I don't think anyone knew. I don't think anyone knew. I don't think there was like a, manual on how you take care of a situation where the band is literally taking the ceiling down, like, raising the roof type situation. So, man, that was insanity. Like, basically the band tore up the venue so much that Brian Fair, the singer for Shadows Fall, the ceiling is pretty low. So like part of the reason the ceiling kept coming down is because his dreadlocks, which almost go down to his feet, they probably do at this point, were getting caught in the ceiling. So we're basically like getting caught in the ceiling, his dreads, and he would like pull down like a, I don't know what that stuff is. It's like the old roofing in like elementary schools where it's like this foam board type stuff that's just like literally sitting on a bunch of metal crossover type thing. So yeah, we stopped the show and I was like, Brian's handing me pieces of the ceiling, like, so I can essentially throw it away.
It's amazing.
And then get the show to continue. And then it happened again and we would start, stop. And I was like, this is literally insane. Like, I don't know what the fuck we're going to do. Like, cause we're renting the venue for the show. It's not like we had not that I know, we didn't charge the band any kind of like destruction fee or anything like that. So I'm going to speak out of, on the top of my head and say that we had to eat those costs, So it was,
for everybody at home. Tuan is showing a photo of Nate getting handed a ceiling tile, again, we will link out in the show notes. Check that out right now. It is absolutely wild. I remember seeing those photos and being like, holy shit, Nate, what are you doing at this company? Like, what is going on?
No one knew. Yeah, we didn't know. And Shadows Fall was pretty big at that time. Because I remember I saw Shadows Fall and Lamb of God open for Slipknot like 2 months later. So it was like this
was like Ozfest era too for them.
Yeah. So, I mean, they were pretty big. That show was most likely oversold, it was like above capacity. So it was busting at the seams. So the fact that the ceiling came down was almost no surprise. So when we see headlines about, shows that didn't go well or, the whole Travis Scott thing and stuff like that, it's like, well, there are limitations to cap. A lot of that's fire code. You have to you have to follow those rules because shit happens, right? So we didn't know what to do, so we just essentially stopped the show, start the show, resume, start, stop. By the time the show was over, like the ceiling above the band at least was essentially gone. It was,
and even in
insane. So
there's a little, like a barricade, like a wooden barricade. So there's a little gap, maybe 5 feet between the audience and the band, but like right above there, kind of near where like the PAs are, that whole like metal grid that keeps the drop ceiling in place was like gone. It was gone. Wires, like there's photos of a couple of the venue staff. I saw you were on the stage, but they were stuffing wires back above. It was, that show in 2021 would have got shut down.
Oh, totally.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. This venue is we've talked about this venue before. It's the Station. It's a tiny little, right? It was at the Station?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a tiny little venue in Portland, Maine that was like a pool hall. You walk down the stairs and to the right is a bunch of pool tables. To your like back and left is the bar. And then the entrance to where the show would be is to the right, just across from the bar. And it must have held, I don't know, a couple hundred.
I think 4.
Because people, you wouldn't hang out where the pool tables were. You'd go into that little corridor and people were on top of each other. And it was a funky venue to begin with a weird drop ceiling and all this happening. And then, then Nate comes in and he's fixing ceilings and they're like, what the fuck do we do?
Yeah. And there's 2 things there too, because you have to think that a metal show is pretty charged. So I know we've seen a lot of chaos happen in the last 2 years in terms of riots and stuff. Like when there's already chaos happening and it's a metal show, it just accelerates what's going on. So the roof is falling down. It's a metal show. Everyone's like almost like excited that the show is falling apart. So it makes the situation worse. It's adding fuel to the fire. So like it wouldn't have been as bad if it was like a reggae show or something, but it was a metal show. So like the roof's falling down. People are like, fuck yeah. So like now more destruction's happening based on
I was going to say it became a thing. It became a thing. Yeah. Like, all right, one's down. Well, there's another one that's got a little chip in it. That's coming down too. And then people are like hanging from it too.
Yeah, the band included. It was like
If
basically like a free for all.
if you want to get a view of what that venue kind of looks like in a small, quick capacity, Spose's video for I'm Awesome, he uses it the second half of the video.
Oh,
You can
nice.
see how close he is to the fans and how close the fans are to him, and you can see the drop ceiling. So if you want to look like real quick, the photos will show it too. But this is like you can see it with people in it. That's moving and all that. It's very small.
Low ceiling. Yeah, it was super low. Just and I think only one exit. Like it's just not a good.
Yeah.
No, back up those stairs, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It wasn't built to be a venue. In fact, where the stage was and the floor was for the stage for the fans to watch the show. I think like before they, decided to book shows there, that was like just where a bunch of billiard tables were. So
Yeah.
like there was no reason to have a high ceiling. There was definitely no reason to have a stage that was going to be even to the point where like if you just jumped, you would most likely hit the stage, even if it wasn't a metal show or whatever. Like you're going to jump. So therefore, like a guy with 5-foot dreadlocks, like they're going to get stuck, On top of that, the venue cap, because it's not an actual venue, it's a pool hall. You don't anticipate, or when you're doing the ticket sales, you kind of take that as a spread on fire code. So like people are on the floor, people are at the bar, people are playing pool, actual pool. So there's a little bit more of a spread. But when a show like that, like everyone was in the actual show. So we actually, in a sense, we're over cap because everyone's consolidated in one spot. So that's another reason why it was pure mayhem.
Yeah, and I bring that up to say, like, short of experience, there's no playbook for any of this. Anything can happen.
No.
Like you said, medical emergency, something with the venue itself, it could be, that venue is that's another thing, that venue is underground.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anything, what if there was a leak or something, you just, man, I like, part of me is like, wish I did that at some point. And a part of me now is like, yeah, maybe avoided a headache.
Yeah.
Let's pivot. Today you're doing a little bit more, right? You're working out in California, doing some venue support there as well. How is that going?
Good. Yeah. This is somewhat recent. So between Maine and moving out to California, there was a little bit of a lapse there in terms of working shows. I mean, I kind of did a small thing in New York City. I worked at this jazz club where we booked shows. It was called Cornelia Street Cafe. It was right next to the famous, world famous Blue Note Jazz Cafe in Lower East Side, New York City or Manhattan. So a lot of jazz acts and stuff came there. So that was like kind of my segue from Maine to New York, kind of not booking shows, but definitely working shows. And it was all jazz, like no metal. Like talk about going from Shadows Fall to like
Right.
straight up like jazz and wine and like, different crowd, but still cool to be in the scene. And it was great, but it just didn't seem like it was really going to go anywhere. So I was like, I don't know if this is something I can really ride. So I guess it is what it is, but I'm also, at least I'm getting the experiences in multiple markets and I'm still close to it. And that's all that matters. And it's really just about the experience. So moving out to California, I think part of bringing me out here was to actually get closer to this industry and the venues and the acts themselves and really, just be part of it. I think I've always wanted to be part of it, but I had, crossed into a new industry that had nothing to do with music for a long time and go to all these venues and, have these memories that we're talking about, like seeing the staff run around and I can spot a promoter from a mile away just on, the way they dress basically. And just knowing how the machine works internally and kind of being on the other side of the table was nice for a long time. Cause it's like you said, I don't have to be part of that chaos. I can enjoy the show and not have this anxiety of like the ceiling's falling apart. Like I can't enjoy the show because I have to like do some damage control here. So this is not fun.
Like literal damage control.
Yeah.
Fixing things. Yeah.
Yeah. And with liability, it's, it's more than that. It's like, shit, we could get sued, and I'm part of this pending lawsuit or whatever it is as a accessory or, whatever it is. Yeah. So the time in between, I was a spectator and I thought it was great, but I always like watched the shows and I was like, man, like I miss it. I think it's a cool experience, money aside, it's just cool to see it from that side of the stage or backstage, especially, or the inner workings of how it all goes down. So being here in San Diego, I've been here for almost 9 years now and seen a ton of shows, more shows than I ever saw on the East Coast, because there's just, there's a bigger surplus of shows in general. So recently I linked up with a local venue to kind of get back to my roots and kind of get back into the game. Basically chance, someone had just left. Because like I was saying earlier, kind of at the beginning of the episode, like there's not a whole lot of turnover because there's only so many nerds, and those nerds, like, that's all they live for. So they're not going to like work at a venue and then go work at Home Depot. It's like, nah, dude, same pay. So I'll just work here. So yeah, I linked up with this new venue or this venue locally and got back into it and kind of doing a little bit of everything. So it's not necessarily stagehand, and not even really booking shows, but kind of a top down view of, I guess I'm wearing multiple hats in this new venture.
Nice. So I mean, similar to what you did before, but maybe a little less chaotic.
Yeah, less chaotic, a legacy venue. So yeah, I mean they've been around since 1974. So this venue's is an actual venue, right? So it's not like a converted pool hall to venue. Like
Good
everything's
point. Good point.
Yeah, it was built to be a venue. So like there's a proper backstage, there's a proper venue entrance, there's a separation from loft seats to general admission. There's a ticketing system in place. There's a partnership with everything that goes into making a show happen from A to Z. So like there's just no loose ends. It's a well-oiled machine.
It's a major market. The weather's nice, like all kinds of things that we didn't have in Maine in 2004.
Exactly. I mean, it's a venue bands want to play. It's like, oh shit, we would love to play this spot. Like, holy shit, is there any openings? What I've learned recently is with venues either A, closing, or B, just different sides of the spectrum on how people feel about COVID and the policies into getting into venues. Independent venues have a huge surge in getting shows secured because it's independent, so they don't have to abide to rules that are top down. So independent venues have their own rules and regulations. So what we're doing is leaving at least the COVID rules up to the band's management. So sometimes it's everyone have a mask, proof of vaccination. Sometimes it's not. So there's a little bit more flexibility. So there's more of a catch-all. Capacity wise, it's pretty small, but people love small shows. So there's a lot of intimacy there. So like literally we'll book anyone from Gym Blossoms to, I mean, the shows that I've seen come through here as a bystander or someone that wish I could go, like show regret style. Like Rolling Stones have played at this venue, Paul McCartney, Foo Fighters, Lady Gaga, all these like giant acts have come through here just wanting to play the show or play the venue for its legacy, which is really cool. There's only so many venues like that have that kind of stature where like Rolling Stones are like, dude, please book us,
That's amazing.
So that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, getting into that, I think most people, you get into it for the love of the game. And like when you were saying like there's not a lot of turnover, especially like on the sound side, like think of like our kind of hometown venues in that like 600 cap or even below. Like the sound guy is always, it's the same guy, same old, he's typically older, he's been there, for ages. I'm thinking like, especially some like the Divier places too. It's like legacy people that, that's their thing. And it's not like new clubs are opening up, there are some, but I think the net numbers is probably smaller compared to years past.
Yeah.
No, exactly. I think there's like a trust there, like, oh, like we know that this works. You open anything brand new and like there's just like a time span where it's like, well, you got to work out the kinks. Like, do you really know what you're doing? Whereas a venue that's been doing it for so long, not only do they have all like the systems down, put in place, SOPs or whatever you want to call it, but the relationships with band management, like they can get the band booked verbatim on every tour just based on the relationship. Whether they can sell bigger rooms or not, it doesn't even matter. It's like, hey, dude, I'm good with you. We're playing, like I said earlier with Head PE, we're playing Palladium, but like on the way to Massachusetts, there's New Hampshire. So I guess we'll fill that 300 person room basically for the hell of it. It's not like we're going to make money on this show. So there's a lot of relationship stuff. And I think if there's anything I've learned with my little time in the music industry, that it's very much relationship based, that it's very small and there's only so many players in the game. And the ones that are in it for the long haul are in it for the long haul. They're not leaving. And to break the barrier to get into the industry is so small because there's only so many jobs available in the industry.
No, totally. I mean, we've seen that with what we're doing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a smaller group than you'd think, but at the same time, getting into that group and getting some headway with people is not easy. So to go to a place that has been around for 40 years that makes things a little easier. You can have the relationship, and you can get the bands to come through because they've played there before, or they know about it because it's an established venue. So being established in the industry is always going to make things a little easier for you than, being a small little venue that in a tertiary market that didn't have any of that.
Mm-hmm. Or at least a partnership, right? So we had Lauren Wayne on from State Theater. She's partnered with the Bowery Presents out of New York City, which also books Higher Ground in Burlington, Vermont. So like they're extremely established. Like when I lived in New York City, they had like, I think 4 venues: Webster Hall, Bowery Ballroom. I want to say a few others. And they're like legacy venues, State Theater has been around for a while, but Lauren's only been at the helm for so long. So like to have that backing from, New York City is as good as it gets in terms of East Coast booking power. So partnering with something like that, like, like it's going to work out. Like no matter what, like I'm sure shit goes down all the time, but like you have multiple angles and experience that you can kind of come to the same common ground. Whereas if we were to like, or I'm saying us, if we were to like open a venue today and try to compete with that, A, we wouldn't have the trust, and B, we just really wouldn't know what we're doing. So we're kind of destined to fail for a few years, almost like opening a restaurant. So there's just not a whole lot of upside coming out of the gate. So these legacy venues, if they can survive, and I think any venue that survived COVID or the pandemic has a good thing going, because there's just only so many rooms, and to have all the zoning and permits and everything in place to continue to execute, I think now especially like you're in a good place, because there's really no one that's going to try to come into the game unless it's extremely corporate, like the SoFi Stadium in Inglewood and stuff like that. But that's a different,
it's a different capacity. That's a different tier. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, you're right. And I mean, I hope in the near future we can maybe shed a little more light on what you're doing, and maybe even have somebody from the venue on to talk to us about it, because they've been around for so long, similarly to the one that we grew up with here in Portland, Maine, and the State Theater. So it would be very cool to. I'd love to know. I mean, San Diego's a much bigger venue, a much bigger market than what we grew up with. What they're turning stuff down, like how do they handle that? Right, how do they handle multiple bands wanting the same date? Like that's what I want to know. I guess the stuff that the nerds want to know. So we would have those questions for sure. So maybe down the road, you never know.
Yeah, I've been a little cryptic on the venue itself, and I think I will bring it up on a later episode. But to answer your question, at least halfway, we co-book or co-promote shows that either A, we have a show booked for said day, and we'll co-promote another venue as a presents. So there might be, for instance, here in San Diego, we /Observatory /Live Nation present said artist on this date. So we can't book it, but we still get a little bit of say in, well, A, we secured the talent. So now we get a little skin in the game, even at a venue that we don't operate. So there's a little bit of like a JV in that sense, like, okay, we're going to co-produce this show, which I think is cool. There's a lot of collaboration in that sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And we see that here in Portland. Like they don't run Portland House of Music, but they put stuff there, State Theater. So that happens a lot, and even in our smaller venues in our smaller towns like Portland. Mm-hmm. 20. Got any more questions?
No, I'm just thinking that I do like that idea. Bring someone from the venue on, and it totally could be almost like a tandem episode where Nate, you have the. At that point, you would have had more experience with this venue and whatnot, because let's face it, 17 years or whatever it's been, 17, 15 years since you last did this, a lot's changed, largely on the tech side, but there's at the same time, you still need feet on the ground. You still need boots on the ground, for venue support, and, gear doesn't load in themselves, and oftentimes bands don't have the crew to do that. So there's someone that has to do that. So yeah, I'm down. Sign me up.
Yeah, no, you're right. The principles are still there, but the technology and interface, or sorry, infrastructure more so behind the scenes is a little bit more dialed. So even I've had a little bit of, or I guess I've had eyeballs on the internal workings of how a show goes down, which never happened before. It was so pen and paper before. Now it's like, oh, wow, we actually have, we have legitimate ticket sell through. We know when we should release production holds or artist holds based on, no shows. So we know what the capacity is based on the ticket scan. Like, now it used to be like you rip a ticket. Now you have ticket scans. So you know exactly how many people are actually in the venue.
Yep.
It's wild.
So,
yeah. different world than what we grew up with, for sure.
Yeah, night and day.
Well, thank you, Nate, for coming on with us tonight. We really appreciate your time. And do you have anything you want to promote? Maybe the Podioslave podcast?
Yeah, I mean, I'm love of the game. Podioslave podcast, best music podcast, in my opinion, out there that talks to music, really at the fan standpoint, which I think is very much needed out there. I think we get a lot, spoon fed a lot of stuff through corporate, but we all know that, what you want to hear is the stuff that you don't hear, stuff that you got to search for. So we make it very easy right here at the Podioslave podcast. So yes, I do have an investment in the game, but Podioslave podcast, I'll promote that all day.
Yeah, rate, share, subscribe, like, all that fun stuff. We really appreciate all the people that have done that in the past, and we appreciate Nate's time in the industry and shedding some light on that tonight.
Yeah, man, that was fun. Yeah. Come back next week.
Yeah, can you come back next week? You get time?
You know what? I'll just show up every episode. Why not?
Okay, yeah.
Screw
all right.
it. Yeah.
We're in. Yeah, we're down.
We'll do it live.
become
Fuck
best
it.
friends?
We'll do it live.
Yeah, exactly. All right. That's it for tonight, folks. Really appreciate you sticking around with us. 91 episodes in and 91 more to come. I'm going to say that every episode now. That's the way it goes. We're going to have more and more and more because we love this shit, and we'll do it every week for you guys and for us because it's fun.
Peace out, guys. Thank you.
What does the third host say? Cheers. Cheers, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, cheers. That works. Yeah. Peace, potheads.